Yes, it is true the final manga of this batch is a game development manga, so while I do review every new weekly Shonen Jump on the regular, I thought this could be something special for me. While I'm not a game developer, at best I did a couple of video games as part of my school projects. I am indeed a professional programmer. Not professional as in necessarily good, but at least professional in employed. So maybe I could give this manga, like this review, a new angle. But the truth is, after reading this chapter, it doesn't really get into programming, so, well, expertise aside, let's talk about Hakutaku. This manga by Daruki Kiyoki Ishikawa follows a gamer, an IRL gamer even. Ikuma is a bit of a loner, and as such he's mostly learned how to play games alone. Not necessarily video games per se, but more in the sense that he has learned to gamify his own life. He loves to set up challenges and limits for himself to surpass, which he loves so much that he doesn't even care or even realize that he's being bullied and everyone around him is putting all of their chores and homework into him and only see him as a tool to do these tasks. That is until he's pointed that out by the second main character of this manga, Nato. Nato is a game developer who's mostly been skipping classes, but she decides to actually go to school now because. But she does return right on time to participate in a new school project, which is conveniently enough to make a video game. She convinces both Ikuma and their teacher that if they can make a really good game, they can wow their class and they'll stop bullying Ikuma. So they spend the next 3 weeks working on their game, and it seems to work. The final pages of this chapter see the entire class completely in love with the game and incredibly surprised that it was made by Ikuma himself. I know, even though I normally try to condense the plot summary and not really go into much detail, this one feels shorter than normal. And I think that's because it doesn't have really that much happening here. The focus of this chapter in the first half is very much on Ikuma's life, personality, and character, and then the second half is more focused on the relationship between him and Nato. I think this manga does a really good job on that first point. Ikuma is easily the highlight of the chapter. The way he goes around gamifying everything is very fun, and his relationship with the rest of his classmates is pretty unique. It's not very often we have a story about bullying where the main character is so oblivious to it that he's actually going on his days incredibly happy. That said, we do get to see how him realizing that he's been essentially being used by all of his classmates shatter his reality and how it affects him during the second half of this manga in what is generally a really touching moment, despite being about him realizing something that we as readers understood from the very first page. I don't know, but I do see bits of my own self as a teen, as, you know, with his age in Ikuma. Moving on to Nato, I do think it's a character with potential. She has this great character design and she seems to have a cool personality. It contrasts well with Ikuma and with her being more of a straightforward leader. Both of these characters are nerdy loners, but the manga doesn't really portray any of them as a sad loser or an edgy teen necessarily, and that's something that I do appreciate a lot, but I really need to see and to learn more about Nato. Compared to Ikuma, we don't learn much about Nato other than what we see at face value, but she seems to be a mysterious and interesting character. There's a lot of questions to answer right now, like why does she skip school? Why does she, decided to return right there and when? Why does she love programming and in game development? And why is she so good at it despite her young age? There's still a lot to learn, and honestly, that is the main thing that's keeping me invested into this story right now. Moving on to the main theme of the story, which, is game development, we don't see much of that in this first chapter, and I think that's a pity. Maybe it has to do with a limited number of pages, you have to decide what you want to include and what you don't, and character exploration does seem to be a bit more important, as something to focus on the first chapter. But, maybe, just maybe, we did not need to have all 3 weeks and have the game be completed by the end of this very first chapter. Maybe you could have spent a bit more of the back half of this chapter focusing on the creation of the game. I mean, yeah, they do talk a little bit about how they're gonna use their classmates and teacher as characters. And we learn some of the mechanics of the game at the very end when the other classmates are playing, but we don't really know what game it is, like what kind of game it is, and worst of all, we are not really, able to get invested in the relationship between our main character and the first video game that they are developing in the story. I think the author tried to convey the newfound love between Ikuma and video game development with the last, two double spreads at the end of the chapter, which arguably are extremely cool, but if that was the point of them, I don't think it was that efficient, and I think that's the biggest flaw of this first chapter. It fails to make us invested in the main theme of this manga, and in the relationship between the characters and that team, that topic. I don't know, I think this manga should look for something like Bakuman in the way that they portray manga creation. I mean, we don't really get to read much of the manga that they're creating in Bakuman, but we feel invested in them nonetheless, and that's because we spend time with our duo exploring their creation process. How they come up with these ideas, their techniques, what they learn from others, really exploring what the manga that they're creating is going to be. So that despite skipping over the large chunks of the part that they're actually, spent drawing and writing and creating, we still are involved with the creation of those series. Hakutaku kind of does the reverse of this. We spend much more time with them programming and creating the game than we do with it telling what the game is, why is it like that, and while, as someone who spent days and nights in university just, with my classmates staring at the screen, on a diet of energy drinks and chocolate bars that we took from the nearby vending machine, it was fun to see, at least part of that represented in this manga, in this first chapter. Programming itself isn't really the most interesting activity to portray in a series like this. Yeah, look, I've been there on deadline days with people screaming all over, one guy in the corner crying, someone just threw their computer through the wall, and there's someone at the table trying to reinsert the SSD that he punched out of their case. Most of programming is just a guy sitting on a computer typing on a keyboard for hours, and that should not be the focus of Hakutaku. Of course, at the end of the day, the most interesting parts of programming and game development, in my opinion, are the problem-solving aspect of it all. How we program this, can we even do that? How do we solve this bug? There's this moment in the chapter where Ikuma mentions that the player character just snaps out of existence for a couple seconds, and we never really get to see like how did they solve that, like how long did it take, was it a major bug? We don't know, and it's just a throwaway line there, and normally I think it's just fine, it's fine to be that, but if you want to make a manga about game development, I think those are the things that you should actually try to focus on. I think those are parts where you may actually get some interest in the game development part, at least not necessarily game development, because you have all the parts about creating characters and the world and came up with mechanics, but at least the part of the programming part, if you want to have people invested or interested in the parts where they are actually programming, I think those moments are the moments where you really should focus on. Like, I think we need to have at least one chapter where there's this major bug and they spend the entirety of the chapter like trying to solve it, and they get really mad and they just punch the SSD out of the case. I don't think you can skip those moments if you're making a game or if you're making a manga about something like game development. As it is, I don't think it's going to survive in the long run. The art can be very nostalgic to a lot of readers. It does blend the new modern digital art with, more of a early to mid 2000s manga art style, and that is very appealing to me. And it will be appealing to a lot of other people that grew up with that, but I've also seen a lot of readers who just are not really vibing with it. In terms of competition within the magazine, I think the closest I can see is like kind of Banashi, but I think both of them are very different and they can coexist in a magazine and carve their own niches and audiences. But the biggest problem for me is that there's been a lot of new series this year getting at least a decent reception, and so far from what I've seen, this isn't really being one of them, so it's probably not gonna stay. We'll have to wait and see. If you want to know my first thoughts on all the Shonen Jump series, then you should click the playlist on the left, and if you want to know my first thoughts on all the upcoming Shonen Jump series, I guess you have to subscribe. And if you watched it till here, thank you very much, and I'll see you next video.